Hello YouTube, if you grew up in the 1980s like I did, you'll probably remember fighting fantasy game books. These were books where you had to roll a dice and then turn to a particular page to see what your fate was. It was a great concept, and the writers Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone went on to form Games Workshop, so they've done reasonably well for themselves. In this video I'm going to be making this creature on the front of DEATHTRAP Dungeon called a BLOODBEAST. This was my favourite cover out of all of the books when I was a kid. So I had this bit of foam packaging and I thought this would be perfect for making the base for this. He sits in this little kind of pit type thing, and this stuff is really easy to cut. So I'm just going to slice off this top section just using a Stanley knife, and to about that sort of depth, about an inch or something like that. And then I'm just going to cut the circle by trimming off all of the edging. So here it is with the top section cut off, and you can see I've just drawn another circle larger than the one that's in the middle, and then I'm just going to trim the edges off. And when I trim those edges off, a knife like this is really useful. It's just a bread knife, but it's got a serrated edge, makes it really easy to cut this kind of thing. And I'll just go around various angles until I get that circle cut out. So at this point I decided to make marks all the way around the circle, and that was where each individual block was going to be. To get the marks individually spaced, I decided to take a circle of paper and just fold it many times, and then each section would be the same width. I'll just try and show you how I did this with one hand, which might not be particularly easy. So I basically just folded it in half, then folded it in half again, and then again, and then again. And at that point I thought that I'd probably done enough. I actually end up not making enough blocks and have to redo this, but this gives you an idea of how I did it anyway. I obviously then just took the bit of paper and laid it on, and then basically wherever there was a fold line is where I would make my individual marks, just using a biro. The next stage was to extend these little marks into lines that go all the way around the edge. I've got a gas-powered soldering iron, and that's really useful because I've got like various tips for it, and if you just touch it onto this foam stuff, the foam kind of melts really easily, so you can do these kind of dimple effects around the edge really quite quickly. I'll show you my gas-powered soldering iron. It's just this Dremel. I really recommend these for model makers. Like I say, it's normally a soldering iron with a typical soldering iron tip to it, but it came with various tips, and this is the chisel type one. Really good for making these little groove lines all the way around the edge. Like I say, it just sort of melts away really quickly and easily. So after crumpling up a load of aluminium foil just to create the rough head and body shape of the creature, I went on to coat this base section with kitchen paper and super PVA glue. Whenever I work with kitchen paper, I don't like the kind of straight edges, so I basically tear up a whole load of pieces about this sort of size without any straight edges on at all. I then paint some PVA glue on the base, put the bit of kitchen paper on, and then use a brush to push the kitchen paper into all of those grooves to preserve them. So remember I said I ended up redoing the base. This was the one with the blocks that were a bit too big, so I ended up making this one with blocks that are a lot smaller. And you can see here where there were any kind of blemishes or marks or sort of holes out of the foam, I've just gone in with a bit of milliput and just kind of remodeled some of that just to make the shapes of it better. It obviously doesn't matter too much because it's all going to be painted, but you can see on that one I left some of the foam on the base as well, and I just carved like a little groove all the way around it as well using my soldering iron again. You could see as well I had actually coated the creature just with a layer of PVA glue and kitchen paper. Okay, this is with that base painted up, so I just painted it a really dark grey all over. I used System 3 acrylic paints for this, and then when that was dry I just went in with some lighter grey, just dry brushed onto all the high points. So by coating the aluminium foil with a layer of kitchen paper and PVA glue, it just gives it a really strong kind of layer to work on. I'm going to be working over the top of this with milliput as well. If you haven't used milliput before, it's a 2-part putty, and you mix the 2 parts together in equal amounts, and it sets rock hard at room temperature in about 4 hours. So normally Milliput is a yellow-grey kind of colour. That's the standard Milliput. This Milliput I'm using for this particular video is called silver grey. So I made all of the teeth individually and just put them on a bit of aluminium foil until they'd set. Then I made the gums and I was able to push the teeth up into the gums. So I was really pleased with how that ended up looking. Then I've just started modelling the front part of his head and those kind of eyebrow ridges along both edges. There's a lot more obviously to do on this. This is just a kind of starting point. The eyes will have to be put on next, and also I rolled a very flat layer of Milliput over his belly. You can see down here a few other things that I've made ready to go. So these are the large eyes to go on the side of his head, and then those are all the tiny eyes that are going to go on the top of his head, and that is the starting point for his tail. I quite often like to make little tiny bits separately as well. So I also made this little sting for the tip of his tail, but that can all be put on later with more Milliput when I'm sort of refining all of the detailed parts of his tail. If I ever make a creature and I end up with a bit of leftover Milliput, I'll just form it into an interesting shape. Sometimes I push into it to form different textures, which I can use for kind of printing purposes. I'll show you some of those in a minute. But also I end up with lots of little things like leftover teeth, or I'll form little balls that can be cut in half, and those can be used for making eyes and things in the future. Yeah, this is something that any of you can do really easily if you happen to have a bit of spare Milliput. Just press into it with various modelling tools until you end up with textures like these, and then you can use those to roll into fresh Milliput that hasn't set yet, and it's just really good for creating textures and things. So if you're lucky, you can get like good kind of skin textures with little wrinkles and things in it. Just anything really. You could use this for doing like terrain making, anything. You can see I've ended up with all kinds of different shapes that I've done over the years, and they can all be really useful. So usually I just make little textured balls or dome kind of shapes, but it's also useful if you make a little roller. So if you start with a kind of a wooden dowel, put some Milliput around the actual dowel and make a hole through the center of the dowel. You can run a bit of wire or something through it, and then you can roll that, use it to roll over a model that you've made. I've got so many different shapes in here. That one looked like a little button Tektite that I was making. Here's one with like little star shapes in it. And then I've got like a couple of these little faces that I started making. This one with a little snout, a couple of eyeballs. I'll probably end up turning those into little creatures in the future. But this is another cool thing that I do if I've got a lump of Milliput left that I don't want to just chuck in the bin. You can squeeze it in your hand like this, and I just really like these shapes. I find them really satisfying. I've got another smaller one in here, look. But what I normally make, if I've got a bit of time on my hands, is some teeth. Teeth are really useful, you know, for any kind of monsters and creatures that you're making, especially if you're making them up. It's quite handy to have a whole load of teeth to help inspire you. But what I wanted to pick out on this occasion were just some of these, which were originally very thin teeth for another creature that I made, but actually I'm going to use these for the spines on this one. Okay, back to the main blood beast. You can see I've put on the main two large eyes, and then I've started modelling the eyelids and all the sort of ridges around the eye. That's working quite well. I've put quite a bit of detail into that, and I've also put some extra Milliput on the top of his head just to create that kind of domed top part of his head. I've put on two smaller eyes at the front of his head as well. But this is just a close-up so you can see that. You can see the kind of textures that I've been putting in. Mainly I'm using tiny ball styluses to do that. Or I've got another modelling tool that's got quite a good sort of sharp beveled edge to the front of it. So that's really useful for kind of getting into all those little nooks and crannies. You can see I did a load of kind of tendons down his neck as well. And I've smoothed in his belly a little bit. Right, here you can see quite a lot of the kind of skin textures that I've put on. Some are just a case of rolling little tiny balls and kind of pushing them into the surface. Some are more like rolling long thin sausages and pushing them onto the surface. They will obviously all smooth in when I'm painting it as well. And then I've also pushed in with like a ball stylus or a different modelling tool with a kind of sharper edge to it, just to push in some of those ridges and things. That worked really well. I also rolled balls and then pushed the spines down into them. Now, although Milliput is rock hard, and I normally use it for that very reason, when you have spikes that are as thin as that, they are still really quite delicate and they snap quite easily. I actually end up removing the spikes and I replace them with the tips of kebab skewers. Right, you can see with the tail, I've added a lot of ridges going all the way up the whole length of the tail. I've added the bit that attaches the sting to the main part of the tail, and again I've put ridges into that. I've put lots of little balls on the tip part of the tail as well, and that adds a lot of detail. Okay, you can see on the top of his head I've put all of those little eyes on, and that took a really long time, but it's definitely worth it. So each kind of eye that I'd made, and that was just resting on a bit of aluminium foil before, I made like a little ball and put it on the head of the creature and then just pushed the little eye that I'd made into that ball of soft milliput and then sculpted the eyelids on at that stage. And yeah, just one at a time until I got them all on there. And I'm really pleased with how that's looking. I also did the kind of eye ridges above those main other two eyes on the front part of his head. So really pleased with how this is looking, and I start to get really excited about how I'm going to paint it at this kind of stage. It's worth noting that if you look at the illustration on the book, obviously we're just viewing that one angle. So to try and sculpt from that one angle is quite difficult. It only looks correct when you view it at exactly the same angle that the book is at. I've had to use a bit of artistic license for what's going on round the back of the creature, because obviously you can't see what's happening on the book. But to make it easier, and the fact that I'm not really going to see the back of the creature anyway, when it's on display, I'll only really be viewing it from the front. So I just used a whole lot of little kind of balls squashed onto the back, and that gives a nice kind of bumpy texture. And I think that will look great when it's painted as well. Right, going back to the base, I just took a whole load of those little balls that I'd made in the past, and I just put them in to create an effect of bubbles. Stuck them all on with super glue, and then I'm just going to paint that whole base area white. So it ends up looking like this, and the reason that I've painted it white is because I want to paint it red, and the red will show up much more clearly if I paint it white first. See what I mean? It's nice and vivid. So I just took some cadmium red System 3 acrylic paint, mixed in a little bit of cadmium yellow as well, and it's gone this kind of slightly orangey red. Next I made a very dark maroony kind of red, and I let that sink down into all the deepest areas, let that dry, and then I've gone back into the top of it with some really watery yellow, and the yellow kind of sinks down as well. So I've ended up with this nice kind of soupy mess. Then I basically poured in a layer of PVA glue. Now the PVA glue dries clear, or clearish, so I'm hoping when all this dries it should look pretty cool. But for the meantime I've just got to wait and be patient and hope for the best. Right, after replacing all of the spikes with kebab skewers, it was time for painting. So you can see I just painted the chest area with a nice kind of cream colour. That was just yellow ochre, a little bit of cadmium yellow and lots of white. I then mixed cadmium yellow with ultramarine and black to make this really, really dark green. This is just a base coat, and it's really quite scary when you first put it on because you lose a lot of definition. But all that definition gradually comes back as you dry brush lighter and lighter greens over the top. I just added a little bit more of the lemon yellow and a tiny bit of white to my dark green to get this colour. If you haven't done dry brushing before, it's just as the name suggests. You need your brush to be really quite dry. So you put a bit of paint on it, Rub it on a bit of kitchen paper until it's almost dry, and then you just start dusting it onto all of the high places on your creature. You can see here I've gone even lighter still with a lighter green, dry brush again, and you can see like all of the deepest places remain really dark. The bright colours are only showing up on the highest places. It's not only a really easy technique to do, it's also quite fast. Okay, here you can see I've gone in with an even lighter green. Now I could have missed probably one or two of the stages and gone straight for this bright green, but I like to build it up very gradually and check that it's working at each stage. I will be adding some small amounts of like wash as well to this to kind of soften it all in, but you'll see that later. Okay, if you look at the pit area, you can see that a lot of the PVA glue has dried and it's gone clear. Some of it is still opaque and some of it is really white, but it's mainly near where the bubbles are, and that is still continuing to dry. So I'm hoping that will match the rest of it and have that nice kind of clear look to it. If you look at the creature, you can see that I've started adding some washes in, which is really just a case of taking a really light green, really watering it down, and just allowing it to run into some of those deeper areas, but in a bit more of a controlled way. So you can also lift it back up. If you put too much on, you can kind of soak it back up into a dry brush and dab it on a bit of kitchen paper. You can see that I've painted his teeth in a yellow ochre colour just as the base, and then I'll go in with lighter colours on top of those. Some of the cream colour has rubbed off a bit on his chest area, but that's okay because I've got a lot of details that I need to put into the tummy area anyway. Right, I wanted to make some metal rings, or metal looking rings, to go around the base area. So I decided to roll some thin sausages of milliput and then loop them around one of these modelling tools. And then what I've done is just slid them off and just placed them on a bit of aluminium foil. I then squashed a thinner sausage of milliput so it was kind of flattened, and then I've made these loop sections as well. I'll wait until all of these are nice and dry, and then I'll glue them onto my base, and then I can start painting them. Okay, this is the finished creature, so I'll talk you through what I've done. I painted all of the eyes yellow, and I put little black slits in each eye. I did a bit of detailing on the biggest eyes with some green as well. Once those were all done, I put some UV resin over each eye, and you just set that with a UV light, and that gives a glossy effect to those eyes. I also painted his tongue in various shades of pink, so that's cadmium red mixed with white mainly, and you can see on his tail where the sting is, I just added a bit of UV resin to create the effect of like a drip of poison on the end of his tail. I thought that was a nice touch. You can see on these loops of metal, or I tried to make them look metal anyway, I painted them black to start with, then I dry brushed silver onto them, and then I just added a wash of like a reddish brown colour, and that gives a rusty kind of effect to those. So here he is compared to the book. You can see I've done a lot of detailing on the tummy area as well to try and match the effect of the one on the book. I think that's worked quite well. Painted all the spikes and just added a bit of a wash of like a reddish brown just here and there to give hints of brown colour. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks to Milliput for sponsoring this channel. Hit subscribe to see anything that I post up in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.